Welcome, Michelle. Yes. Um, so it's 11 a.m. now, so just start the webinar. Hello, Ijeoma. So yes, hello everyone and welcome to another exciting edition of the ESQ Practical Lawyers Academy free webinar series. We are glad you could join us here today. My name is Chidima Abu and I'm a Research and Development Associate at the ESQ Things Limited. I will also be the moderator for today's webinar. At ESQ Training Limited, our mission is to expand the frontiers of continuous professional learning courses and trainings across various areas of practice. We have tagged this webinar series, the Launch Our Webinar series, as they are slated to hold at 1 p.m. during lunch break. They will hold 3 times every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. But however, in order to accommodate our Muslim participants, the Friday webinars will hold at 11 a.m. And after every session, we will provide resources in easily accessible formats for everyone who's interested. Our training on mining agreements, contract and transaction issues starts on the 19th of April and it runs to 23rd of April. And it goes for just 100,000 naira. Also, our 5 weeks training on the mechanics of oil and gas contracts. It runs to 22nd of April to 20th of May, and it goes for 200,000 naira. If you're interested in any of these trainings, just send me an email on the address I put in the chat section. So you can now watch our webinars on our YouTube and at my ESQ Legal. And after watching, please kindly subscribe. Thank you. So on today's topic of today's webinar, topic is funding innovation in Nigeria. And some of the things that will be discussed today is understanding some of the main Nigerian instruments that support research and innovation activities, sources of innovation funding, setbacks of innovation funding in Nigeria, the impact of funding innovation in Nigeria, and many more with the questions that will be asked during today's session. So if you have any of such questions while the webinar is going on, please type them in the Q&A or raise your hand and anytime it will be answered. So we'd like to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Mr. Adeleke Alex Adedike. He's the managing partner at Dwale Obie and Alex Adedike. Thank you, Mr. Alex, for joining us today. Yes, we also have Davidson Oturu, Mr. Davidson Oturu, the partner at Alex. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, for joining us today. We have Ms. Michelle Chiketie, Senior Associate at DLR. Thank you for joining us today. We have Ijeoma Wala. She's the co-founder and legal advisor at Dafferon Limited. Thank you for joining us today. So yes, this is an introduction. We'd like to start our webinar. So basically, finance, this topic, we all know that finance plays a critical role in any kind of innovation as it allows the organization or business to conduct research, adopt technologies necessary for inventions, as well as develop and commercialize innovation. So assessing external finance for innovation is a very important challenge for firms and SMEs. And these financial constraints are one of the reasons why policy typically plays an important role at funding the early stages of technological development. So in this webinar, and with the help of our panelists, they would illuminate more on this topic, exploring other Nigerian and international funding mechanisms open to Nigerian-based entities and some of the main Nigerian instruments that support just research and innovation activities like I mentioned earlier. So I think we'll start our presentation today with our managing partner, Mr. Adeleke. Oh, okay, sorry. I think my mic is fluctuating. I think I'll work on that.
Hi, good morning. How are you? Thank you very much for this opportunity. But I'm not, your mic was actually, I'm not sure if
Yes.
I heard the question clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. What was the question, please?
Yes, I said, with the brief introduction I gave, we'll start with you. Want to hear your opinion about this particular topic, basically. Before, I think Ijoma and Michelle they have slides and presentation for today's webinar. So, want to hear what you have to say before they take over.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to ESQ for this opportunity, and thanks to my colleagues and other panelists on this session. I think that where we are now as a people in terms of the impact of technology and innovation cannot be undermined. I think that what we've seen most recently is a situation where technology has come to play a major and a definitive role in everyone's life. And all of this technology cannot come to bear without adequate funding. Funding to the extent that starts from, I think we oftentimes hear good stories at the time when those publications are made on TechCrunch and all the other blogs. But the real deal starts from the bootstrapping stage, when these guys are looking for how to get as little as $1,000, $2,000 US. I think this will give myself and the other panelists on the stage the opportunity to speak on how people can actually fund innovation, whether in Nigeria or outside of Nigeria. I don't want to go into the meat of the conversation just yet, but just to speak to one or two, three things that are easy ways that one can fund innovation. Debt is an obvious part of it, but again, never advise. I won't personally advise people to jump at debt at such an early stage. Maybe, if anything at all, some form of convertibles. Also, equity is a sure option of also raising capital. But again, you also don't want to trade out all your equity at such an early stage as well. But again, it is an obvious option of raising capital. Also, in addition to this, is most recently crowdfunding has become a good way of raising capital and funding innovation. Most recently, the SEC approved the crowdfunding regulation that allows people to use the crowdfunding portal to be able to raise capital, to be able to finance their innovation. And also, in addition to this, we've also had, even as a big central bank of Nigeria has provided grants in many regards that would help people to fund innovation. We also have, generally, I'd mentioned bootstrapping, which is a typical way of saving up money and using your own funds to be able to fund your innovation. And another way to fund innovation is, so equity angel investor is an obvious way at funding innovation to ensure that those people who give you this early stage money in trickles of US dollars that would allow you and give you the opportunity to be able to drive that product that you're trying to build. These are some of the known ways of funding innovation as a preliminary to my own conversation for the day. Thank you.
Okay. Ijeoma, I think you have a presentation for us. I think you can say something now. Like,
Chidima, please let me know if you can see my screen.
yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so I'll just jump right into it. So most of the things that we already, Mr. Adedipe has already mentioned some of the things as a preliminary to this discussion, but I'll just skip over some of the impact because I take it for granted that we all have seen and we all know the impact of funding and the advantages that it gives to both businesses, to the creativity as a product, and also to the country as an economy. So I'll just take it for granted that we all know the impact of innovation for any ecosystem at all. And then I'll just jump right into the legal instruments that support innovation in Nigeria. So the first one is the very obvious one, the Constitution, which kind of, I mean, when you look at the fundamental principles, you see that this is something that is recognized by our Constitution. Promoting science and technology is an ideal. It's something that every government, every public institution should be working towards. It really shouldn't matter the sector, and you have that enshrined in our Constitution. Obviously, the non-justiciability of the fundamental principles is a different discussion for another day, but it's also very important to have that in mind. Then we have the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020. If you look at the CAMA, there are certain innovations that have been introduced in the recent CAMA that is geared towards encouraging investments, encouraging new businesses to get on the ground running. For example, the new single shareholder, single director provisions is innovative and it's new in the country, and in the sense that it allows a single innovator, entrepreneur to set up his company before even looking for investment. So you hit the ground running, you have that opportunity to start running before you're able to set up, before you're able to seek for further funding from outside investors. Then the patents, and also going back on the topic of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, when it comes to scaling up your business, for example, there are new innovations in the CAMA that allows you to make use of mergers and acquisition, for example. I mean, there are certain provisions that allow that make it easier for you to receive investments in the country. So, for example, you have the provisions on on companies buying back their shares. You have all these provisions that enable you to, or that make it easier for PE firms to approach Nigerian companies and invest in them. So these are some of the novel provisions that were introduced in the new Companies and Allied Matters Act. Also, you have intellectual property laws such as the Patents and Designs Act, the Copyright Act, and the Trademark Act. What they do, in essence, is to guarantee that you have protection for your ideas, you have protection for your business plan, and you have protection for any product that you've created, in the sense that you're able to exploit it to the exclusion of others. While the Patents and Designs Act and the Trademark Act guarantees, these three acts obviously guarantee separate IP rights, but the ideal thing is for you to be able to exploit any idea that you've done, any idea that you've created, and any idea that you're working on and you're trying to push into the market, to exploit it to the exclusion of every other person in that given market. So these laws guarantee that. Then the final one here is the Secure Transaction Immovable Properties Act that was introduced in 2017. The idea of this law was to ensure that you have ease of access to finance. So if you're a small business or you're a medium enterprise, you do not have the privilege or you don't have the luxury of owning real tangible assets, which is what traditional banks are looking for. So traditional banks are looking at, if they want to give you a loan, do you have a collateral, and whether they can take on that credit risk by giving you a loan that you're looking for. So what the Secure Transactions Immovable Properties Act has done is to ensure that you have access to finance using your movable property. So that can be anything from your vehicles to computer to your cash flows to even your shares. So it gives financial institutions and lenders that comfort that they can have an exclusive charge on your movable assets, and that wasn't possible before. I mean, you could charge it, but the common risk with that was that financial institutions were scared that they were not able to recover in case your company fails. So what the Secure Transaction Immovable Properties Act has done is just to give them that comfort. It creates the collateral registry that we have in Abuja that helps, so financial institutions can approach the collateral registry to register their financing instruments or documents or whatever it may be, and that gives them the exclusive charge on those assets that have been named in the financing instrument. Then the next thing I'll talk about is the sources of funding. But before I go into these different sources, I just want to generally state that the choice of finance that an innovator or an entrepreneur would use will generally depend on the stage of the innovation or the stage of their company, and also their appetite. So whether they have an appetite for risk or they have an appetite, it just depends on what their motivation is at that particular stage. So I've broadly defined this into 3 stages. The reason, obviously, people can define business stages differently, but I've just done this for the purpose of our discussion for today. So the first one is the ideation stage. This is when you're still thinking of your idea, you're still trying to put it into a tangible product that actually works. If it's a service, you're trying to test that service to be able to know the appetite of your customers for that particular service that you're offering. So at this stage, you're going to be relying on personal finance, family and friends, business angels, generally people that have heard your idea or you've communicated this idea to, and they think it's tangible and that you have a potential to make an impact. So these are the type of people that will generally back your ideas at that preliminary stage. And then you have grants, for example. There are several government grants. There are several organizations that are offering grants depending on sector. There's the agricultural sector, there's ones for education. So depending on the sector that you're going to operate in, there are several grants that are available just at that idea stage that you can take advantage of to be able to grow that idea. Then the next stage is the product development and market entry stage. At this stage, you already have a tangible product. You're trying to get into the market. You're trying to push that product into the market, get more consumers and more customers to try it and to depend on it. And at this stage, you should have obviously had a team in place and you have your company set up and all the necessary regulatory issues that you need to comply with to have that running. So at this stage, you're looking at venture capitalists. So VCs generally would want to look at your product. They want to know that that product has a potential for impact. They want to look at your product and make sure that it also has, they will look at your product, they will look at your market, they look at the team that you're working with, and then finally, they look at the opportunity cost for them as well. So these are some of the things that you need to have running at that stage when you look towards getting investments from VCs. Then also there are tax incentives, depending on your sector. There are tax incentives for running certain businesses. So for example, the health, education, and agricultural sectors, they have import waivers. So if you're importing machineries for agriculture, you get certain waivers. It is not necessarily you receiving funds from the government, but it helps you to limit your spending. And that in a way is a sort of funding, indirect funding for your business. And then also innovation hubs and incubators. I've placed them in the second stage because while some innovators can back you up at the stage, at your ideation stage, generally you would need to have a product that you can present to them. So some incubators, what they offer you is mentorship. They offer you, some can give you funding, and then generally most of them would want to give you a workstation or an opportunity to collaborate with other entrepreneurs, maybe those people that are still at your stage or the ones that have already grown in that sector that you're trying to enter into. So that kind of gives you a collaborative environment to grow your business. The next stage is the growth/scaling up stage. When you are at this stage, you already have your business running for a number of maybe a year or two. You've tested the market, you know what it's like, and you're trying to grow your business at this stage. Now you'll be looking towards retained profits. You'll be looking at bank debt, specialist financing. You'll be looking at equity. I say equity here in the sense of moving to the stock market or issuing more shares to PE firms, because I mean, at the product development stage already, you're already using your equity because you have your company set up. You're giving VCs part of your equity. And then there are several other considerations that you need to put into place at this stage. But I put equity in the third stage in the sense that you're looking to get more financing. And that's where you will have your PE firms coming, or if you're looking to get more money from like the stock market, you can approach the stock market as well. And then you have the crowdfunding, just like Mr. Adedipe said. You can use crowdfunding. It's become a buzzword these days, but the stepped in to release the rules on crowdfunding. So you cannot necessarily rely on crowdfunding unless you meet certain requirements that the SEC has stated. So for example, your company has to have been running for a minimum of 2 years. They need to see that you have traction and so many other things. And you need to use a registered intermediary as well. So these are some of the considerations that you need to put into place when you're going to be relying on crowdfunding these days. And then lastly, I'll just talk briefly about setbacks to innovation funding in Nigeria. Like every other business, and I think these are things that are worth considering if you're a company or if you're an innovator that you're trying to break into a market or like to scale your business. So you need to consider certain things that, first of all, investors want to see value. So you have to make sure that you have the right value proposition. You have to make sure you have the right business model and strategy to be able to convince these people to back your idea. So these are some of the things that can make or break an idea. So if you're not able to secure this sort of, if you're not able to communicate your value proposition or have the right strategy, you may not be able to get that much investments into your idea. Then the next one is finding the right funding option. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to consider several factors. For example, you need to know where you are. You need to consider your appetite for risk as well. So from experience and from speaking to other investors as well, and from speaking to entrepreneurs, you get to see that some people do not want to take on debt at the beginning stage of their business, not because they don't think that their idea would succeed or survive, but at that stage, they don't want to mortgage what is left of their future growth. You understand? And then some people are very wary of issuing equity. So they need to be sure that the people that they're issuing equity to, the VCs or the PE firms that they're giving equity to, that they are bringing more than just money. Some people want a situation where some people don't want to dilute their own stake in their own company. And then at the end of the day, they lose out. So these are some of the things. And there's no one size fits all for funding. So you can't go through all of those stages like that I've mentioned, and you cannot make use of everything. You need to find the one that's very, very suited and well, the one that you can adapt your business to. Then the next issue would be confidentiality. Most investors, most entrepreneurs and most innovators have a problem of approaching investors that they don't know because they are scared that this issue of communicating your idea at that ideation stage where you haven't developed it yet, you're scared that the person you're communicating it to could just run with your idea, give it to somebody else, back up that person, and have that running before you know what's going on. So most people are very wary of doing that, and you need to first, and that's why you need to go through the stages, be sure where you are, and know the right people that you're speaking to. So where you don't have that in place, where you don't have that trust for the person that you're, I know there are a certain number of them. This is not to say that all investors will do this to you, obviously not, but you need to know who you're speaking to. There needs to be that level of trust for the investor that you're speaking to, depending on the stage that you're at. And obviously your lawyers can advise you when it comes to confidentiality and whether you need NDAs and all of that. And obviously, when you are still at the ideation stage, you don't want to tell somebody, I have an idea, but before I communicate the idea to you, you need to sign an NDA. An investor will look at you and think you're not serious, obviously. So there are just several things that you need to put into place when you're going through some of these considerations. Then the last one will be the regulatory environment. We've heard the buzz, we've seen the trends in the media, we've seen what our regulators are doing, but I just think it's worth considering. There's a thin line between regulating and promoting. We've seen regulators who are charged with these two roles. We're trying to regulate an environment to make sure that investors, to make sure that the ecosystem functions properly, but we're also charged with promoting innovation in that sector. So how do we balance that out? How do we make sure that that line doesn't get blurred? How do we make sure that while regulating, we're not killing that sector in essence? So I think the regulatory environment plays a serious role on investors coming into a country and investing. It plays a serious role in motivation for people because you don't want to go into a place where there's regulatory uncertainty. You don't want to putting your funds into a country or into a company that you're sure that the laws will change just like that without notice to investors, without notice to the community. These are certain things that are worth thinking about. And there's also the concept of regulatory competition. The idea of this is that investors will generally move to countries or move to countries where they believe that the regulators will favor that particular sector. So for example, if you know that investors in UK are enjoying certain things, tax cuts, tax holidays, certain incentives for investing in that particular sector, most investors would want to move there because everybody's looking for value, everybody's looking for profits. So, but where you have regulators that see that we're lacking in this area, we're unable to attract investors because this is what we don't have. I think it's worth thinking about as a regulator for you to understand what can we offer investors in return. Having uncertainty is not healthy for anyone. Regulatory uncertainty is not healthy for any ecosystem at all. So these are certain things that regulators can do. Think about it and understand the fact that if investors notice that another ecosystem or another country has more favorable laws for their investment, they will tend to migrate to that. So regardless of the amount of innovation that is going on in a country, regulation still plays an important role in that regard. So I'll just leave it here, and I'm happy to hear the thoughts from my other panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ijoma, for this brilliant presentation. Yeah, so Michelle, I think you can make your presentation now.
Thank you very much, Chidima. Let me share my slides. Okay, can you see my slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so Ijoma talked about the funding phases. I don't know why I can't see everybody else, but I'll just speak on. So Ijoma talked about the funding phases, and that's where I want to really delve into in the short time that I have. Okay, so I will talk about, just spend a minute or two on the preliminaries, and then let me just slideshow mode. Okay, so that then I go into the funding stages. I also have 3 funding stages here. Okay, so preliminaries, well, just thinking about how much of our GDP or money spent is spent on research and development in Nigeria. I looked at a little bit on the federal budget on R&D, which isn't much at all. And the gross national savings of about 20%, that's how much is available for investment generally, not just on innovation. And also the fact that funding is necessary for economic growth and economic stability. So it's more like, like a chicken and egg problem, sort of. So I also want to talk about startup and SMEs or MSMEs. They're not the same. Startups are innovative, they're disruptive, they're scalable. A small business or a medium business or a micro business is not necessarily the same. So funding for innovation, I will put it under startup because that is, the way it's conventionally defined. It's new, it's unique, it's disruptive, and all that, okay? And as part of the preliminaries, I just want to mention, the 2 basic forms of capital, the equity and debt. Of course, there's a hybrid between the 2, the convertible, and there are different characteristics, characteristics for whether it's equity or debt, what it really means and all that. I don't want to waste too much time because we don't have all the time. Okay, so at the pre-seed and the seed stage, right, funding comes from yourself, that's the innovator, the founder, friends and family. There are grants, there are angel investors, and there are the incubators and accelerators, right? So at this stage, money at the pre-seed and the seed stage is for research and development. That's how you get capital for market research. You have an interesting idea. You're not sure, how it will work, what kind of platform you need to set up, what consumers might want, and then you have to carry out market research, which can be a little bit capital intensive. Also, that's when you want to write out your business case, you want to write out your business model. That's also where you get funding for initial operating expense. And that's where you get ready, you think about essentially how to make sure that your innovation is scalable, because it seems that investors are not just looking for interesting ideas. They want to make sure that your idea, you can sell, you can provide services. It's not limited, right? You can provide your product or services to 10 million people, 100 million people globally, and all that. So that's where you think about that seed stage, that pre-seed stage is where you get funding. And this is what, okay, so going into the funding terms, sorry, I'm rushing into the funding stage, funding terms. So like the other speakers have said, you have to think about what percentage of equity you want to give out at this stage, and what type of equity. Are they going to be preference shares, or what would be the terms of that equity, the loan terms, if it's going to be debt, right? Would there be additional funding in the future, on what basis, and all that? Are there going to be options? The reason I include all this is for the seed stage, when you're talking with angel investors, and the profit and loss. What happens if the business doesn't succeed? What happens if it really succeeds, right? Would your family and friends be like, I want more than my own share? You need to document the terms of investment, very clearly, so that parties know what they want in any event. Also, there will be representations and warranties, especially around financial statements. Intellectual property is critical. Ijoma had mentioned that it's critical. You want to know that this investor hasn't stolen this idea. You want to know that it's protected, it's registered. That is essentially the seed, right? That's the asset that you have at that stage. Also, there are no litigation of any sort, and also that you have the authority to raise the fund from your partners or your co-founder. Also, there are other provisions on anti-dilution, pro rata participation rights when new equity is being issued in the future, to raise funding in the future, and the rest of them. For grants usually, a lot of the times, they have a restriction on use. You use this, okay, we're going to provide this funding in such and such phases and such milestones, and based on the deliverables, this is the only thing you're going to use this fund for. And this is what your intellectual property, these are the terms around what you create, right? And we want to make sure that, especially if it's a very scalable invention, you want to, especially if the funding or the grant is coming from an international source, they want to make sure that what you're creating is, globally people have access to it, will be useful generally, okay? Also, funding sources. I just want to talk about some of the few funding sources I found. There are a lot of grants, donations from government and philanthropists and NGOs for R&D activities. This is where the majority comes from. For instance, the Moderna vaccine, that's the COVID vaccine, AstraZeneca, and a lot of others, we have, funded with government and institutional funding, essentially not from the private sector in terms of investment like VCs and the rest of them. Also, there is the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program that is supported by the African Development Bank Youth Entrepreneurship Innovation Trust Fund. Their NGO funding is usually conditioned on output, right, benefiting the public generally globally. I mentioned that earlier. And there are also a lot of foreign government funding, but usually you may have to be operating from a UK registered enterprise or an enterprise or company registered in the country of that government, right? And also available in foreign universities for specific programs. I found a lot of information on fundingdesk.org, which our listeners can, or founders, innovators may find a lot of information on grants and funding for their business. Also, well, the Nigerian government has a few, which is on the screen. Let me not waste too much time. Okay, just to mention, SMEDA, and that's Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria, provides resources for startups. I saw something on the Survival Fund program. I'm not sure how that works, but it's worth checking out for people who need it. Also at the pre-seed and seed stage, that's where we have the accelerators and the incubators. So, and they're different. Incubators, they provide office space, they provide mentorship, they provide access to experts in return for equity. Both are in return for equity, but there is no time limit. You operate under an incubator until you can stand, operate until the business can essentially operate on its own. But accelerators are, you get into an accelerator program. It's very competitive, where you just have a few months of training, intense mentorship, just getting you ready for your next milestone. It could be some Series A funding, but that is, and accelerator programs are not created equal. There are some that is akin to getting into a Harvard, or an MIT, and there are others that are not quite the same. And that is critical because accelerators actually get you ready to pitch to VCs, so they're not created equal. And some of the examples that I have here, Y Combinator, I put it there because we know that Helium Health raised, I think, about $10 million, was it last year? And we've had others, but you see that a lot of them are from like top-notch accelerator programs. They're alumni of top-notch accelerator programs that VCs can, should I say, trust and all that. But we also have incubators. There's a CC Hub that has been, there for forever. Then there's SPAC. SPAC actually incubated Hotels NG and Select NG. Just some examples there. There's the Forbes Digital Startup Accelerator and the rest of them. So those are just examples. There are lots. Also, at this stage, that's where you also get angel investments. These are people who are very successful, and they're very successful probably in a specific field, and they're interested in opportunities, right? Actually, especially at that early stage where you're still determining a lot of things about your business, that you already have an idea and all that, okay? We have a lot of them. There's Rising Tide Africa, some of the famous ones, Rising Tide Africa, African Angels Network, eVentures Africa Fund, and then individuals who are angel investors. Okay, so at the early stage, so you can go, crowdfunding route, and there are pros and cons to raising micro monies from a lot of people, or going the route of venture capital. So depending on what really works for you or for the innovator here, you might want to, depending on what you need really, you might want to go to VC route or the crowdfunding. Nigeria, we just got the crowdfunding regulation passed in January. To my knowledge, I don't know if there are any crowdfunding portals or intermediaries that have been registered among all the ones that we know that are operational. That's investment crowdfunding. Okay. So eligibility criteria for crowdfunding, like Ijoma mentioned, you have to be a micro or small or medium enterprise with a 2-year operating track record, and that's MSME is defined, in this medium policy, which is what I've set out there. If you don't have 2 years operating track record, then you may still raise crowdfund, fund on the crowdfunding portal if you have a strong technical partner or a core investor, say like an angel investor, So that's for crowdfunding. There are offer limits. You can only raise 100 million, for instance, if you're a medium enterprise, 100 million naira. That might be small depending on what your goal is. One second. Okay, so you have to pass like the intermediary will have to conduct due diligence and background checks. and it has to come out clean, obviously. And also requirements for tag-along rights for investors and put options for debt offerings. So essentially, it just makes sure that it just protects those retail investors who have, bought into your company, whether it's by equity or debt, especially at the point where controlling shareholders are transferring to third parties, within 3 years. So investors can sell the debt security or the equity security, on that basis. Okay, so just success tips, for venture funding, right? You want to have a tested and trusted, viable business model. Ijoma had mentioned that. You have to be fully operational. You have to have a healthy cash flow, right? And established customer base. Venture funds are looking to make, they're looking for growth ideas, right? Just cite them. They're also, should I say, opportunists? Not opportunists in that way, but they're looking for really, really, really good ideas that they would fund and get massive return on, anywhere from 3 to 10 times their money back. So if they invest like 10 million, they want at least, like 30 million back in like 5 years, or 100 million. That's like very small, but just for the sake of example. And a lot of the times it's better if you graduate from a top accelerator program. It's very competitive to get in there. You have to have a strong idea. It has to be scalable, and scalable has to do with having the structure in place that so that when you don't then need to, begin to make any specific intense change in your infrastructure and all that in order to scale. It should be scalable, and a lot of the technical innovations are easily scalable because they're online or they're on an application or something like that. So it's just easily scalable. It's a matter of getting a lot of customer base, on board. Okay, so at VC investment agreement, are just some of the clauses that we regularly see in those types of investment agreement. We see the valuation. Okay, this is what your company is worth. This is my valuation of your company. And after I have invested, this is the value. So just that's the pre-money and the post-money. And the security is usually very clear on the securities or the shares that of the notes, the terms, what they are. We know preference shares or convertible notes, give some type of advantage to the investor over, other shareholders, right? There are usually detailed provisions on dividends, information rights, control provisions. The VC would want to have a say when you're deciding certain things. Okay, like you want to change your business, should I say your business model? You want to have any change to your constitutional documents? Essentially anything around massive spending is going to be defined, right? How much you can spend on the business or improving the business or paying a specific executive, how much, beyond which you have to get an approval and all that. And you have anti-dilution clauses because VCs want to keep a right to maintain their percentage shareholding in the business, right? So those are some of the terms that we see. So I've listed some of the venture capitalists in Nigeria. There are others. There is Eco VC, there is Greenhouse Capital, there is the IDF Capital. There's just a number of them. But like I said, there are a lot of others, right? Venture capitalists, sometimes I like to define them differently between venture capitalists and private equity fund. I see that private equity fund, they go for a much established stage. They go for enterprises at that established stage, and they want to streamline operations so that there is more revenue, something like that. So that's like at the later stage, sort of. So at the exit or advanced stage, this is where the business might try to raise money to, buy bond issuances, right? Whether it's private or public. The FMDQ offers, should I say, the infrastructure or the platform to issue bonds to qualified institutional investors, right, as it's defined, rather than without having to go public, right? And you might want to do an IPO, you know, and all that. So this is a stage where the VCs might want to exit or might decide to remain, depending on what their investment strategy is, right? So thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Chidima, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle. Mr. Davidson.
All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. So it's been amazing listening to everybody speak on the very interesting sides to innovation funding in Nigeria. So maybe mine would have been good to come after Ijeoma's so that we would have flowed from that, but I really enjoyed Michelle's presentation. I'll be looking at two different areas. Let me just see if my slides can come up now. Sorry. Yeah. All right. So, well, I'm starting off by looking at setbacks of innovation funding in Nigeria. There are a few statistics that I have here. So if you look at what has been happening in Nigeria recently, there's been a lot of investments going on into startups, into tech companies, into SMEs and, product-like businesses generally in Nigeria. So TechPoint, which has been doing quite a lot of research recently, they reported that 81.3% of the total amount invested in West African startups, raised at least $1 million in the past 10 years. And this came from outside the continent of Africa. So it shows that there's a lot of interest in what goes on within the West African and by extension, Nigerian startup space. The question though is whether the environment in Nigeria is comfortable enough for them to feel encouraged to stay a little longer and probably grow the economy. So further stats here shows that in 2020, Nigerian startups owed 71.2% of their investments to foreign funders as well. And out of this, foreign investors contributed $85.8 million out of the approximately $120.6 million that Nigerian startups raised throughout that year. So if you look at that figure, you could probably say that 3/4 of what was raised in Nigeria came from outside Nigeria. Again, shows you that a lot of people have interest in what goes on here. Still raises the same question as to whether we are encouraging enough for them to stay here. So really, what are some of the setbacks we've noticed? And I think Ijeoma raised, one of the things she had raised that she was rounding up was government regulations. We've been seeing a lot of that happen recently. And almost everywhere that I go, people are always wondering what's going on with CBN, what's going on with SEC, because most of the regulations almost seem anti-success. In fact, there was a program that I went for where somebody asked a question that why is the Nigerian government just against the success of innovators? Because it almost seems like when people find an entry point to make money and to actually grow their businesses, independent of what the government can do, then the government suddenly comes in and shuts it down. But I guess that's because most times the government is playing catch up. So that's the thing about innovation, right? It goes ahead of, innovation basically deals with coming up with new and creative ways of doing things. Now, if the government is still trying to use tools from the 1960s to address what's going on in the 2021, then it's going to be difficult for them to catch on to what is happening. An example is the anti-social media bill, which I think still finds its way now and then again to show, because the government is just trying to come to terms with the fact that all of a sudden something happens and then it can be out there in the social media. So we recently saw what happened with the CCTV, the chairman of the Code of Conduct Tribunal, and how he was caught on camera, doing some crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden, people have seen it. In times past, it have probably taken several months. That's if anybody even got wind of it at all, before that kind of information would come up. We've seen the seeming cryptocurrency restrictions, but as that is happening, most of us saw what happened with the launch of Coinbase IPO, going to such a huge launch and all the thing that comes along with it. But in Nigeria, we're still trying to restrict cryptocurrency and wondering if it's a Ponzi scheme when all of that has gone further than that. Last week, we also saw SEC come out, kind of banning share dealings and people that deal with the, management of foreign stock portfolios, saying that it's illegal in Nigeria. I mean, these are things that have been done. And I believe SEC's regulations are even wide enough to enable those kind of things. But we still find a way to shut some of those things down. So when you don't just understand these government regulations, then it just makes the whole thing crazy. And it's a serious setback for innovators, both within and outside Nigeria. And I guess the community would have to find a way to seriously engage with these regulators so that they'll get to understand what can actually make innovation grow. You look at different countries like Tunisia, where they have an innovation hub that is actually driven by the government there. Even the regulatory sandboxes that were set up in Nigeria, they're not functional, and not much is going on there. So definitely government regulations plays a serious part in setting back these guys from being able to move forward. Of course, high interest rates on loans from banks and micro-lending companies. So people will tend to probably just try and bootstrap and rely on friends, founders, and family, and just find a way to keep moving until they probably make themselves attractive for a VC to come in. But the VC doesn't just come in, like they say, there's no free lunch given in Freetown. So the VC wants something. The question is, would you be comfortable enough with what the VC offers you? And we saw a case play out with Health Plus and all the different issues that went on with them. How the founder was kicked out. She came back, she argued, they've been in court, they're in arbitration now, and all of that. Now, again, those kind of scenarios now makes founders and startups wonder, how do we go about this whole thing in terms of dealing with VCs, in terms of dealing with banks, in terms of dealing with private micro-lending companies or money lenders. So sometimes that makes them reluctant to expand themselves or do more than they could actually do if they felt comfortable enough that it would be protected. Well, sometimes just having a lawyer really can solve some of those things, or having a lawyer that understands how those things work. We can't talk enough about the doing business climate in Nigeria. For anybody who is involved in transactional work, dealing with regulators in terms of processing stuff, be it the competition agency, the SEC, the CBN, it's crazy. There is actually no ease of doing business. So when I see us move along the rankings, and now we're ranked 131 out of 190, I think we should probably be ranked 200 out of 190, because I don't know what the countries that are below us are actually doing. That means there really is no business going on there, because it's really hard, and investors sometimes find it very difficult getting past all the bottlenecks. You want to get permits, business permits, it takes you maybe 6 to 7 months. So for any investor who wants to fund innovation, there's also the expense that goes along with it. So think about what the overheads that an MTN, for instance, would have in Nigeria, and compare that to what they would have in other countries where you have stable supply, where logistics are easier, where the roads are safer, where there's security. You really can't put a price tag on some of those things. And when you now start putting price tags on them by hiring your own private security, having your own power supply, having your own water, basically building your own ecosystem and habitat to survive, then that brings a lot of expense and overheads to you. Of course, IP rights is always very big. People wonder, okay, so if I release my trade secrets or some of my other IP rights, like my copyright, have a patent, and it's still probably at the developmental stage, and I expose this to a potential investor, what comes out of it are the legislation that exists robust enough to protect you where those kind of things happen? You know, sometimes for innovators and startups, that's a very big worry for them. And because of that, some of them just go around it by their own native ways without really maximizing what can come out of that. That's another setback. Of course, COVID-19 affected quite a bit of what happened, you know, in the whole innovation space. And like my earlier slide showed, actually affected the level of investments that came in for innovators last year in Nigeria. So the lack of sufficient fiscal incentives to drive innovation investors. So in some jurisdictions, you actually have you know, startup acts, and in different parts of Africa, there are startup bills that are also emerging as well. So when you look at things that around legislation on tax deductibility of the investors' losses, you know, you don't see enough coverage for that. A lot of people may not actually know that there's actually a venture capitalist act in Nigeria, but it's not being used. The tax authorities don't countenance it when they are looking at, you know, what are venture capitalist or angel investors using their fundings for. So, and I'm not sure that they're even interested in looking at that as well. So that lack of sufficient fiscal incentives to encourage and drive investors in the innovation space also serves as a setback. So some things have been said around the impact of funding. So I'll just probably touch them briefly. Of course, we can clearly see the impact of it. A lot of Nigerian companies are now, God knows, like over the last 2 to 3 months, and even from last year, the amount of investments we've seen, it's almost like it's a competition now, you know, who is raising, who is going unicorn, you know, what's happening in that space. So one of the many benefits of funding innovation in Nigeria is how more funding spurs the creation of more products and innovation, which ultimately creates a tech ecosystem similar to Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of activity. And we know that when you're talking about tech hubs in Africa, you'll probably be talking about Kenya, Nigeria, to an extent Ghana, and South Africa. We did hear a few days ago that Twitter decided to set up its headquarters in Ghana. And we can't really fault them for that because, again, it takes us back to what the regulators do that makes Nigeria seem rather opaque to the developed world. So we wonder if we're assuming Twitter, if the government is talking about shutting down Twitter because of NSAS or creating a social media bill, who will, in his right mind, will want to set up a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in a country that you're not sure whether some extremists will just blow it up or something. So I think with the right mindset, really, the benefits of this funding of innovation can actually come to play because Nigeria can now start having that appearance of a Silicon Valley in itself. And there's something here from the McKinsey report, you know, shows that some alone to over 200 fintech standalone companies, plus a number of solutions provided to offer to banks and mobile network operators as part of their product portfolio. Now, this is quite interesting that between 2014 and 2019, the fintech scene raised more than $600 million in funding and attracted 25% of the $491.6 million raised by African tech startups in 2019 alone, second only, of course, to Kenya. You know, so it shows you that even in terms of our GDP, even in terms of our revenue base, foreign direct investment, there's a lot that can come from having the right type of funding coming. Like I said earlier, we've seen so many Kuda, AppZone, Bankly, quick delivery. You know, so there's this interest to know what's going on in Nigeria, what's happening here. It almost seems like maybe Nigerians have the magic wand or something. You know, so the impact of all this funding is that Nigeria now starts to appear more attractive again to the international community. I also mentioned here about FDI. You know, most of these foreign VCs, like we saw, over 70% investing in Nigeria. They definitely have to import that capital into Nigeria, which could increase our foreign exchange base. You know, we're always concerned about FX, and the CBN government is coming up with a lot of creative and uncreative measures, from printing more money, to banning different imports, to generally exhibiting a level of not so much creativity. I think more FDI would actually pour in with a more enabling environment. My conclusion is actually quite simple. Can I just basically brought out some of those things? So Nigeria can actually attract the right type of funding. Innovation can actually grow and be more productive for the Nigerian economy under the right type of management and understanding, as well as awareness from the government and other players in the ecosystem. So, thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you, Chidima.
Okay. So I have some questions for our panelists. So I think I'll start with Mr. Alex Adedife. Yes. So how does funding innovation exert influence on our GMP?
How does what? Sorry?
Funding innovation exert influence on our GMP.
Our GNP. What do you mean by GNP? Sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I struggle to, but I can hear you a little bit.
Okay. I said gross national product. How does
Gross national
funding
product.
innovation exert influence on? Yes.
I think the real question is how does innovation and technology in itself affect even the GDP as a whole, right? We know that during the government of, I think, before this government was Jonathan, one of the things that they had done was to include technology and services under the GDP, and to also show the impact of that. And we know the number of activity that has happened between that time and now. We see these activities every day. People here have spoken a lot about it. We've seen the funding activities that are come to take place, translating into job creation, translating into making life a lot easier for everybody in different ways, particularly the tech businesses that have come to solve tons of problems. So every time we fund innovation, right, we are technically creating wealth. Anytime we fund innovation, we are technically growing the economy. All of this offshore monies that come into the country, they come to grow Nigerian businesses, even though some of them may be based out of Nigeria as a whole co-structure. But in reality, the OpCo and the operating companies are always in Nigeria, and those are the companies that take the ultimate benefit of this funding. So it's important that we look at the upside of funding innovation. Every time that is done, it helps us to be able to arrive at the position that we are growing an economy for everybody.
Okay, thank you. So who do you think is currently funding the innovation right now in Nigeria?
Who do I think is funding innovation? Everybody is funding innovation. Everybody is funding innovation. We've said it here already. Government is funding innovation in their way. Central bank is funding innovation. Development banks are funding innovation. The innovators are funding innovation. VCs are funding innovation. International funding entities are funding innovation. And angel investors in many ways are funding innovation. I am funding innovation, I know for a fact. And even for those of us that also create services for these innovating companies and charge less than our hourly rate and are charging less fees, sometimes not even charging fees, we are funding innovation. So everybody is technically funding innovation and everybody is happy about what we see. And that's why there's so much attraction there today. And again, to add to what everyone has said, I think there's actually a lot of funding out there. It's in the last few months has been crazy, to say the least. There's a massive fear of missing out. People are afraid of missing out of the opportunities, and that's the beauty of exit positions. You see, when you start to have exits in the market, right, then people start to believe more in funding, right? We've been in a situation where people have been funding innovation for the last, say, over a decade, but we could barely count how many exits that have happened within that period, not until most recently. Years before in technology, there were just very few exits that happened, M&A exits, maybe Banzo into Switch, etc. But in the last 1 year, we've had more exits and we've had more good stories. Paystack Stripe deal is a good exit position. It's giving people the faith in the market. And when people start to see how many X's and multiples that it gets, then you think to yourself, why don't I use this 10K as an angel investor to invest in this little, call it a gamble, because it may just turn to a 20x business for you. So everybody is funding innovation, and I think we should all continue to fund. But again, as the ecosystem grows bigger and bigger, and with time, we'll have more structured funding processes, and there will always be more funding because the market is here. It's a massive population of over 200 million people. Expected that with that type of market, there are more opportunities.
Okay. So what advice do you have for lawyers who advise clients in this area?
My advice would be that we should support them. Most times the innovators are fully glued on building a product. They want to build a product. They don't care much about the legal and the regulatory implication as much as, because again, they don't know that much. Not because they don't want to know, but they are most just glued on building a product. I think lawyers should advise them appropriately. I think we should not skin them of all the resources that they have. I think we should be fair in billing. I'm fair in billing. We're fair in billing on our side. Sometimes, like I said, we don't even bill. But I think lawyers should be more in tune and learn the business of the client. It's not just getting the client on board. You must also understand what the client is trying to do, what kind of product they're trying to build, what problems they're trying to solve. And with that way, it's easier for you to understand the regulatory regime around that client's product and to be able to serve the client better.
Okay, thank you. So my next question goes to Mr. Davidson. So narrowing it down to our law firms and judicial system in general, how does funding innovation affect productivity?
I didn't catch your question. I lost you at first.
Okay, so I said narrowing it down to our law firms and judicial system system in Nigeria, in general, sorry, how does funding innovation affect productivity?
Affect what?
Productivity in law firms and judicial systems.
Man, sorry, I'm not hearing you. I can hear law firm generally productivity, but I don't get your question at all.
I said, how does funding innovation affect law firms and judicial system productivity?
Okay, well, I'm not sure that I really get your question, because funding innovation and law firms, I'm trying to see the correlation between that. So I don't get the question at all. Sorry.
Okay, I would send it to you, but let me ask you another question. Sorry. So what do you think about the need for policy intervention on finance for innovation?
Okay, well, yes. So there is need for that, because it's not everybody who has the right opportunity to come across maybe like a VC or an angel investor, or someone who can take an interest in their product and innovation and say, okay, I would, move you through this particular stage. What you will see in a number of jurisdictions is that there are policies around this. There is also the opportunity for everybody to have access to certain types of funding, so that with that, where you have a good idea, where you have products that you feel can be launched, there'll be access to funding for you. Now, in the absence of any clear-cut policy on those sort of things, what you have sometimes are departments and agencies of government, different initiatives like the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, for instance, simply trying to create an avenue for assisting some of these startups that they're sending. So there has to be like a policy statement around how startups are recognized, how innovation is being pushed by the government, and why it matters to the development of the nation. There are a couple of things that exist. Some people may not even know that there's a NIDA fund, for instance, that banks and telcos, cybersecurity companies actually contribute. I think somewhere in the region of like 1 to 2% of their turnover each year to that fund. The intention of that kind of fund, for instance, is for it to drive innovation, but I'm not sure that that's what it's been used for. So it has to be something that is very direct and speaks to the entire nation, so that whether you're in Sokoto, whether you're in Bauchi, where there's lack of sophistication, some places don't even have lights to even say, okay, let me even put up my product on the internet so that somebody can see. People don't have that access like that. So there has to be something that is all encompassing, that can meet innovators at the different places where they are, so that they can grow their businesses.
Okay, all right, thank you. Michelle. Hello, Michelle, are you there?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think I sent you a question in the chat box.
Okay.
Mr. Davidson, I sent you a question too, so I'll give you time to prepare to answer the question.
Sure.
What do I think about the CBN regulation on cryptocurrency? Well, I think, first of all, that the CBN, it's just like a lot of central banks, are not very clear, not sure how to deal with cryptocurrency, right? Because there is this talk about, and that's because the CBN obviously regulates, should I use the word regulate, fiat currency, okay? And there's this talk about, will crypto assets become medium of exchange, store of value, and the rest of them, that that central banks generally are already, are handling, right? So I know that there is a discussion around central bank digital currency, And I think there's just that unclarity as to how to deal with it. Okay, so, and it's not just, it's also not clear what exactly cryptocurrency will eventually look like, right? Second, on the other hand, have said that, oh, we're seeing cryptocurrency as just virtual assets. They are commodities, and we're regulating them as assets. And if you think they're not securities, as securities, if you think they're not securities, then you have to come to us and tell us that these are not securities, you know. So there's just that clarity as to what cryptocurrencies, how it will, you know, affect different aspects or various aspects of our economy. Are they assets? Are they just virtual assets? Or would they become currency? And would they become some sort of, should I say, decentralized currency where I can pay for, you know, it becomes a medium of exchange that is not regulated by the CBN? I think that's the fear, you know, central banks generally. But as to their, should I say, their classification as assets, as securities, you know, I don't think I think we're yet to see exactly how it will play out and all that. So that's my little idea on it.
Thank you, Michelle. I sent a question to Ijoma.
Yes.
Hello, Ijoma.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So the question says, how can funding financial innovation lead to financial crisis? And the point, I think I just want to make two sets of points with regards to this question. The first one is, there isn't really a clear-cut, there's not direct link between funding innovation per se and financial crisis. The only instance where you can have that is where you look at crowdfunding, for example. That kind of cuts across retail investors that do not know what they're getting into, that may not have enough information about the company. And then you have some companies using that means as a way to, maybe when the company fails, they jump ship and they run with these investments without having adequate returns or accountability to these investors. But when you have investments or small innovations or small startups, like Michelle had given us the clear distinction between MSMEs and startups. If you have a startup and, for example, you're going to different investors to seek for funds, and eventually these investors know what they're getting into, they have the information, they kind of drill you, they ask you certain questions, they know what the market is like, and they try to, like I pointed out earlier during my presentation, they kind of try to satisfy themselves that you know your product, you have the right team, you know the market you're getting into, and there's opportunity for them. So most of these people are already aware of what they're getting into, and there isn't like a financial crisis per se that could arise from that sort of transaction. So the systemic risk is not there. So when we think about funding financial innovation, for example, we have a lot of fintech companies in Nigeria now that are operating. I know the CBN might think, fine, it's the users that could be at risk, for example. So that brings me to my second point. So funding it per se will not necessarily give rise to systemic risk. It's the users and people who are going to these fintechs or who are going to these platforms to trade, who are going to these platforms to engage with the market, thinking that these platforms are secure. So when they are not regulated, for example, and I think that's part of the reasons why CBN tends to make some of these erratic decisions, but there are ways to make policies that have impact. So if you're going to make policies that have impact, you should think about making sure that there's certainty. So if we're thinking of introducing a regulation, we should be able to have stakeholder discussions around some of these issues. But when you talk about systemic risk, it generally comes to users and people that eventually end up buying those products and whether they get value for their money. So if you're putting your money in an unlicensed collective investment scheme that isn't regulated by the SEC, the SEC has already come out to warn about some of these investments, but that doesn't stop some of these platforms from operating. So you see people trying to use some of these things and getting retail investors that don't have proper knowledge of the market For example, you have cryptocurrency now. It's a very, very volatile market, but at the same time, it has high risk, high return dynamics to it, which is very, very attractive to certain people. But most people don't understand. I wouldn't say nobody. Most people do not understand how it works behind the scenes, but they know that these platforms are there and they engage with these platforms, they trade money and they encourage other people to do the same. So I think that's where the financial crisis could come from and where the systemic risk lies. I think that's what the regulators are trying to do, to make sure that they find a way to make sure that intermediaries, fintech companies are the ones that they are properly licensed and they're properly regulated and they can be accountable to investors and users alike. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David, hello?
Yeah, so I've seen the question now, right? It's narrowing it down to our law firms and judicial system in general. How does funding innovation affect productivity? Okay, well, yes, so this sort of takes us, well, maybe away from the general innovation funding now, and they are directing this to the legal sector in itself. So how does funding within the legal sector, how does funding innovation affect productivity in the legal sector? So now probably say that this takes us within the realm of what you would call legal tech or law tech, which we sometimes have to talk about, and how introducing innovation into that space can actually make the legal profession more, well, can take away part of the drudgery that goes along with the legal practice. And I would say that that the introduction of innovation into the legal practice is something that you really can't put a price tag on, to be honest, because when you look at what we have to do going to court, having to sit in court all day long, virtual hearings became sort of like a buzzword during the pandemic period because everybody was now trying to log on. And I'm sure that some of us saw some memes of judges trying to get onto Zoom and they didn't know how to use that. I actually got to court one time and somebody was talking about virtual hearing and the court told him, look around you, do you see any facility here that we can use? So it basically shows you what funding and innovation in itself, right, would actually go a long way to affecting the productivity of the judges. Now, artificial intelligence, is something that is used a lot. Big data analytics is used in the US now to by judges to solve cases because it's precedent based, right? So we already know if Mr. X did this, then this is what will happen, this is what the witness, so you already have all of that. Rather than the judge having to carry, all the law reports and sift through and say, okay, this is what happened here. AI and analytics does that for him, saves him time. Your judgment can be out in 1 week rather than 6 months, 9 months. Look at the law firms as well now. What can you do there, with that level of funding of innovation into the practice and productivity in the long run. For the firms who understand how these things work, I mean, with the right types of platforms, you can even have a mobile app, that would basically deal with templates, or have a platform so that anybody who wants an agreement, you just pay maybe like 20,000 naira, rather than having a lawyer sit down, take a meeting for several hours, write down what you're saying, goes, drafts an agreement, sends to you, say, no, that's not what I want. With these platforms, you just go there, say, this is what you want, and then an agreement comes forth for you. So the lawyer doesn't need to be sitting down there to be responding to you. The chatbot does that for you, so it takes care of that. And the money goes to the lawyer. You could even have maybe just two lawyers operating a firm and servicing a large number of clients. So you will then reduce the overheads that would typically come with a law firm. You don't need people filling up different law firms or saying that we have 10,000 lawyers. You really much get a lot of things done with technology and the right type of funding. Now, to even build those apps or those systems don't come cheap. So that's where the funding comes in. If the firm is strong enough to be able to do that, then it simply does that, sets up its systems, makes it easy for work. The productivity will definitely be better. Would it probably affect the jobs of lawyers? Maybe to an extent, because when I don't need a 2 to 3 year lawyer reviewing what a 1 year lawyer did, that means that one of them has to go away from the system, which could probably make lawyers to start doing other innovative things than simply trying to vet agreements or look at transaction documents all day long. So our time and our training can then be tailored towards really solving the right types of problems, really. And I think more lawyers will then get involved in technology and understanding the dynamics beyond just the periphery stuff. Those are my initial things on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering the question perfectly. So I think an attendee raised his hand, but I don't think he has any question to ask. So we just round up the webinar for today. So thank you to our panelists for this brilliant session today. We really learned a lot from everything that has been discussed today. A very big thank you to our sponsors, ALEX, GLS, and Bloomfield Law Practice, and Advocate Law Practice for making this webinar possible today. Please note that our next webinar series will be on Monday by 1 p.m. and the topic will be on improving process management within a law firm. Improving process management within a law firm. This is a very important topic and you can't afford to miss it. So lastly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for webinars, past webinars, and more webinars to come. Thank you, attendees, for today, and thank you for everyone who participated and who watched this video. God bless you guys. Have a lovely day.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.